All right, so we've talked a lot about the labor market. And so far, we've been making an assumption that is really obviously untrue. And that is an assumption that there is a single labor market. That's clearly not right. If this were true, everyone would make more or less the same wage, which is something we know not to be true. Right? What have we been doing over here? We've been saying, what is the wage? Which is a ridiculous question, because there are lots of different wages. Right? So so we clearly don't have a single labor market where the wages end up being the same for every single person. Right? That's just not true. So this leads us to a question. Based on what we've been talking about so far with supply and demand, we still end up with different people in different occupations making different wages. So why did that happen? Why are there wage differentials? All the wage differential is different people getting paid different wages for whatever reason. That's it. So there are a number of reasons why we see a wage differential, right? Why different people get paid different amounts. In this lecture, which I'm going to talk about today, we're probably not going to finish. We'll finish next time. I'm going to talk about human capital, which is one approach to explaining why there are wage differentials. So we'll talk about this next time. We'll expand on a few more other ways this can talk about as well. So what is human capital? So human capital sounds like a worse term than it is. It's not the same thing that it means in human resources, by the way. They use the same term and it means something different. So when I come to say human capital, we mean the set of skills and abilities that a person has. Okay, that's it. So some of these skills might be innate, some of them might be learned or trained, but it is basically whatever it is that makes you a good worker, good at your job. And different people can have different kinds of human capital and different levels of human capital. Some people are just better at their job than others, or they might be good at different jobs than each other. Human capital basically says that people have different marginal productivities of labor, which affects the demand for their labor. Basically, if you are a highly productive worker, then an employer is going to be willing to pay you more in order to be a highly productive worker for them than they might be willing to pay someone who is less productive. So if two different people have two different marginal productivities of labor, and this is our labor demand curve, and whoever has the higher marginal productivity of labor is going to be offering a higher wage. Going back to that idea that we had before, that people get paid roughly what it is, the value of it, or whatever it is that they produce for the employer. If that's true, then you would expect somebody who gets paid, who produces more is going to get paid more. And that's exactly what's going on. So why do we call it human capital? Well, we think of it sort of like an investment good, right? So I mentioned that some of these skills might be innate, some of them might be learned or trained. Especially when we think about the kinds that are learned or trained, it's like an investment good. You spend time and money to invest in yourself and your own skills, which is something that pays off later in the form of higher wages, right? So it's capital in the sense that you are investing in yourself. That's the idea. So you spend money to create the human capital and it sticks around like a financial asset, giving you money over time in the form of higher wages to pay off that additional skill. So when we have human capital, it allows us to think about different labor markets as being different kinds of industries that are not perfectly substitutable. People have specialized skills. You can't just skip from one job to a completely unrelated one just because the wage happens to be higher and you want to chase it. So there are two main ways we can think about human capital. One is general human capital, which is just sort of being generally a better worker, having more skills overall. So having more skills is sort of the idea of general human capital, someone who's just a better worker than somebody else. Another way of thinking about it is specific human capital, which relates to certain sets of skills. That's just sort of being good at one job as opposed to a different kind. So this first kind, just somebody being more skilled than somebody else, might lead that person who's particularly good to be offered a high wage in order to work somewhere. Down here with specific human capital, being good at one job versus another might mean that you could stay working in a job where you're being paid less because you wouldn't be any good at a different job if you switched to that other one. So with specific human capital, if different people have different skills, each occupation acts as its own labor market. So for example, your doctor probably could not choose to become a car mechanic and vice versa, no matter how different the wages happen to be. And so if we think about competitive markets, and we say that labor markets being competitive, and we think, well, hold on a minute, doctors make a whole lot of money. If they're making so much money as being doctors, why don't more people just go become doctors so they can get that doctor money, right? That's sort of what we'd expect in a competitive market. If the frozen yogurt market's doing super hot right now, well, then you'd expect some more people to open up frozen yogurt stores, and that would compete the additional price away, right? Why doesn't that happen for doctors? Well, because not everybody has the skills necessary to become a doctor, right? So even if they're getting paid a whole lot of money, a lot of people were not going to be able to shift into that market, and so they're going to be able to maintain high prices, even though there's no direct barrier to entry. It's just difficult to enter, or it's difficult to become a doctor. So when this happens, wages can be different in the different markets because the products being sold, products in quotes, right, aren't exactly the same, right? The kind of labor that you are offering as a doctor is different than the kind of labor you're offering as a car mechanic. And this would be true if we happen to be in a market where car mechanics got paid way more than doctors, right? Nothing special about doctors here, they're just differently skilled, right? If something happened tomorrow and it turned out that car mechanics started getting paid $1 million a year, all the doctors out there would be thinking, man, I wish I was a car mechanic right now. But I can't because I don't know anything about cars. I only know about buttons, right? So some people are going to be able to substitute between different markets to respond to wage changes, but not full, right? You're going to see a little bit of substitution, but it's not going to be entirely accounting for differences. Oh, okay. I was wrong. We already finished today. So to sort of sum everything up, and we'll go a little bit more over human capital next time as well. Labor supply comes from the decision to work or spend time at home. Anything that shifts the value of that trade-off is going to shift that curve. So if you have a bunch of money sitting around, you don't need to work, you're probably not going to work as much. If you have kids or whatever that's going to keep you away from your job, then that's going to be less labor supply as well. Labor demand results from employers wanting to hire workers to produce goods for them. You will keep hiring workers on sort of a profit maximizing basis. If they provide you more value than you're spending on them, then it's worthwhile to do so. And so you'll keep hiring until wage equals price times marginal productivity of labor, which is the labor demand curve, right? That tells you for a given wage, how many people do you want to hire? So when we're looking for shifts in labor demand, anything that shifts the price or the marginal productivity of labor is going to shift our labor demand curve. Keep in mind the real question when we see some sort of substitute good like additional technology is how does it change our marginal productivity of labor? Does it make our time more or less valuable? This all sort of assumes that we're talking about a single market, but in fact, the labor market is many, many different markets. One broad way to think about that is in terms of different occupations. You can't just switch occupations at a drop of a hat just because the wages are changing, which is going to keep people from switching entirely. So we can think of this in terms of human capital, right? Human capital can make you a better worker because you have more skills. You can get paid for those skills. It can also make you differently skilled. Different people are good at different kinds of jobs, which basically means that there are different labor markets that you can't just swap between on demand. Going back to truckers, right? Truckers is another great example. Like wages for truckers, I imagine, are probably going up pretty sharply right now. I hope so, at least. And yet, not everybody has what it takes to be a trucker, or access to a truck, or a license that you would need to go to be a trucker. And so there's the specific human capital that you can't just swap between one and the other. But this allows us to explain why, at least one aspect of why different people get paid different wages, which is that it's differences in skills. This is still all based on an idea that people are going to basically be paid the value that they provide to their employers. That's not always going to be the case. We will talk about that next time. All right, let's do some quick concept checks. So let's ask ourselves this. Let's talk about labor supply. So let's say that these things happen. What do you think this is going to effect is going to have on a labor supply curve? So first, the best video game of all time has just been released. Is this going to shift labor supply to the left or to the right? Raise your hand if you think it's going to shift labor supply to the left. How about to the right? Well, think about it. Best video game of all time is released. That increases the value of spending time at home. So you're going to want to work less. This should shift labor supply to the left, if only a tiny little more. All right, people start having more kids. Do you think it's going to shift to the left or the right? Raise your hand if you think it's going to shift the labor supply curve to the left. How about to the right? Probably to the left here, right? Having more kids, again, more valuable to spend time at home. So you would expect people are going to work less. Wages rise. Raise your hand if you think it's going to shift to the left. How about the right? How about not at all? Trick question, not at all, right? This is a price change. The curve does not shift because of a price change. This would lead to more labor supply, but it will not shift the labor supply curve. All right, tricky one. Universal basic income. Imagine everyone just starts getting a check in the mail every month. And imagine that that check is large enough to cover your basic needs. What would this do to labor supply, at least in this basic model that we have, that leaves out things like people liking to work? Raise your hand if you think it would shift labor supply to the left. How about to the right? Yeah, so at least in this model, which is simple, right? The simple model, we would expect that universal basic income would lead fewer people to want to work because they now have their wealth has gone up. Basically, they don't need to work as much to cover their consumption, so labor supply should shift to the left.